Today we're going to be talking about returning to praise on the Deep Dive podcast, episode 38, 37.
That's what I said. I don't know why we can't get our numbers straight.
Yeah.
Every week, we don't think about it until that very second.
Right. Yeah. I thought of it beforehand once.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
that was it.
Right.
We need to put a sticky note in here or something.
I know. Well, we got a little off. Braden, Braden is the guy who uploads the podcast, and he took a vacation. So a couple of episodes ago, didn't get uploaded, and then I gave him the one from last week, and he didn't upload that one until I gave him another copy of the one that he missed because he didn't have that. And so anyway,
well, that's why we have the YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we have Braden upload the audio and Chris uploading the video.
That's
so
right.
One of those gets posted with consistency.
I would say YouTube. We control the YouTube. Chris
Yeah.
controls the YouTube, so
Right.
it will get uploaded
Yep.
consistently.
Unless it doesn't, you know.
If it doesn't, we cut and pay. Who cares?
So I have a retraction actually that I got to start out with.
You mentioned that last night. Yeah. What's the retraction?
Last week, remember, I was shooting mostly from the hip.
The whole thing. You never looked at one note.
Yeah, and there was one name that I could not remember for the life of me off the top of my head, and it was when Jesus was a baby and he was brought to the temple.
Mm-hmm.
I said that the priest's name was, and I paused. I said Ananias or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the guy that looked at Jesus and said, I've seen his salvation.
Mm-hmm.
The guy's name was Simeon.
Okay.
There's a prophetess
Simeon.
named Anna that occurred around the same time, but that's been eating at me all week.
So so you walked away, and that didn't leave you. You were wondering if
because I'm like, I know
wrong.
that's not right.
Gotcha.
So I went and looked. I'm like, okay, yeah.
And
my wife always jokes with me. She's like, you always say the wrong names though. I'm like, yeah, but when I know that I've done it, that's when it starts to bother me. Because I always do the same things. Like if I'm talking about Noah, I'll accidentally say Moses or stuff like that.
Right, accidentally.
Yeah.
You don't.
And I'm horrible with names anyway.
I gotcha.
Yeah,
well, we forgive you for that, Josh.
Yeah.
I wonder if anybody was saying he's so wrong. He doesn't.
Probably, yeah. one of our 12 listeners just in the notes.
I'm tearing them up. Hey, that reminds me. I would love to look on our YouTube channel and get some questions.
Yeah.
Whatever question. Is there anything that you want people to ask? Any kind of genre or anything specific?
Yeah, I mean we're always open to answering questions that listeners send in.
Yeah.
We don't have to dictate the material ourselves.
Yeah. What would you like us to talk about?
Yeah.
Perhaps.
It can be a deep dive into the audience.
Yeah, that'd be good. I like it. I enjoy. Well, I used to listen to every podcast we've done.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't anymore.
Yeah, I listen to it when it is recorded.
You do?
Yeah.
You listen to
so I'm listening to it right now.
Well, same here, I guess. Okay. I'm sorry that skipped me. I used to ride my bike at night around the neighborhood and listen.
Yeah.
And I was just not interested in doing it. I mean, it's kind of my voice gets on my nerves, so I don't listen.
This is what my wife means.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It used to be that I wanted to make sure that we didn't, I don't know, make sure everything was okay. I guess since we have Chris now, and
a lot of actors get asked that, like, do you watch the movies you're in? Yeah. And it's always interesting how they answer that, because most of the times, like, I don't really watch it too much. Like I'm kind of sick of myself by the time the movie's over.
Right, but they still are fans of other movies.
Yeah,
and I still listen to podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to I go through modes where I listen to nothing but podcasts most of the time.
Right.
But right now I'm watching a lot of YouTube videos. But Josh, you have a question. Let me do this first. Well, tonight is a big night, snow.
Yeah.
Sportsman's
Oh, I
Night
thought you were
Out.
going to talk about your anniversary.
I will in a second.
Okay, yeah.
I saw the paper you have there. Snow Sportsman's Night Out, and by the time
Oh, this isn't mine.
out,
This was just here.
it was.
Yeah.
I brought it in. It was
Oh, okay.
talking about training if you're volunteering, when to show up and that kind of thing.
Right,
But
yeah.
Snow Sportsman's Night Out. We're looking at having close to 6,000 people there tonight.
Yeah, then for people who aren't familiar with our church, every year our church hosts this event called Sportsman's Night Out. We used to do it here on the grounds of the church
Yep.
until it grew so large that we could no longer contain the
That's
people
right.
and still be, considered a safe environment
Right.
in
Yep.
the event of an emergency.
Mhm.
And so, in Pensacola, I think the largest building in Pensacola is a civic center.
Yeah.
It can hold thousands of people, and so we rent that out for a night, and we just light that place up.
Yep, we
Yeah.
do. And Pastor said himself from the pulpit last week, it's not a moneymaker for us.
Right.
It's not, and that's not the way we do business.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We know that it's going to cost us money, and it does, but it is for every number is a soul, So
Yep.
and there's people that come up to the pastor and the other pastors every year and say, I was saved at Sportsman's Night Out,
Yeah.
in their seat.
Yeah, and the way the event works, there's obviously things to get people's attention, like there's giveaways and prizes and stuff
Boy,
like that.
that's
And we
an
have
understatement of the year
Yeah.
right there, man.
And there's always some sort of celebrity guest who has a Christian testimony, whether it's someone from a sports broadcast or show or something, or a famous athlete or something
Yep.
like that, and they always come and give their testimony. And it's mainly a way for another way that Marcus Point likes to connect with the outside world.
Sure is.
Specifically for the purpose of sharing the gospel.
Yeah, it's fun, and as a gun club, you, Chris, and I have been down there a couple of years representing the gun club. We're not going to have a table this
Represent.
year.
Nope.
We represented. We're not going to have a table this year by choice. It's
Yeah,
just didn't-
but we'll be there.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
be there. I'll be taking pictures of the audience, and it's a fun environment. A lot of people will come to that perhaps wouldn't be comfortable stepping in a church,
Right.
And that's part of what we do with our outreach here.
Mhm.
So, anyway, we're excited about that. And one other thing, real quick, I'll go over. My family and I celebrate 2 birthdays for me. One is September 15th, my birth date.
Mhm.
And another is August 8th. That's when I had open heart surgery.
Right.
And got a second chance at life. And I guess we could celebrate my reborn again with Jesus as well. But this is one that we also, people call me and send me texts, happy 6th birthday.
Right.
So as we speak right now, 6 years ago, I was flat on a slab with 4 probes inside of me, robotically assisted open heart surgery,
Yeah.
and it's always amazing to me that that God has created a person, one that has the skill, the desire, and the confidence to go, yeah, I'll cut into your heart and fix it. And then send you on your way. That's what happens.
Yeah.
That's what happens. This doctor, robotically assisted.
Well, that's another level to it. Is like there's the person who's like, I'll cut into your heart, and then there's the other person who's like, I'll use a robot to cut into your heart.
No kidding.
And then there's another person like, I'll design a robot that some random person can use to cut into your heart.
It is crazy
Yeah.
how all of that is happening this day and age.
Mhm.
Now, that was 6 years ago. I'd be interested to see what the robot looks like now. I'm
Yeah.
sure it's different, but the doctor wasn't. There's several doctors and nurses and people around the table, literally around the table with me. But the doctor who's doing the cutting, he's 6 foot away, sitting at a screen.
Yeah.
And his head is in this machine, and he's flying it like a.
He's playing video games.
Yeah, it's like I saw the machine, and it's like he's flying a simulation or something. And I saw a video. You look it up on YouTube. Mitral valve prolapse with regurgitation is what I had. So my blood was pumping backwards. It was pumping forward, of course, but whenever at rest, there's these gates that come back and close. Just think of a old farm gate
Like a saloon door.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
That would go totally. That would seal off.
Yeah.
So, you go through the saloon door. That's whenever your heart pumps. At rest, the saloon doors will come back and close and seal off blood so it wouldn't pump back where it shouldn't go into your lungs.
Yeah,
like
a
that.
backflow preventer.
Backflow preventer. So my backflow preventers, those gates were torn. So, and I saw the video of it. They were just flapping in the wind, man.
Yeah.
Just going. They were. It's like this. Somebody busted the saloon doors. Busted the wood. But the hinges were still good.
Right.
They're still, you could still open a little bit and close a little bit. So all that blood that was pumping, it would pump out at rest. It would pump back. Then it would try to pump it out again and pump back. And overall, it was leaving blood around my heart, and it was pooling, and it was killing me.
So they had to install some new saloon doors.
They repaired
the ones. Yeah.
He said that the operation would take about, I think he said 5 hours. It ended up taking about 7. He said it was a little bit more complicated than we thought. And nobody, including myself, ever said, "What do you mean?" We just let it go, you know what I mean? What do you mean it was more complicated? So I think what happened, that there's cords that control the saloon doors, like you call them. They're cords.
Yeah.
And some of those cords were frayed and broken. That's why it wouldn't seal off.
Okay.
So my thought was, just from doing a little bit of research on YouTube, sometimes you get in there and those cords are worse than you think they are. So they're just kind of flapping, and that's what was happening to me. So mitral valve prolapse, I turned into a level 4. There's level 1, 2, 3, 4, and I was a 3.75.
Yeah.
The last time I went to a doctor. And Donna and I went in for my last checkup, and she looked at me and said, "Are you feeling okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm feeling okay." They took me straight from where I was, not back to the waiting room where everybody else was, straight up to where I needed to be before I died.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was whatever they heard whenever they were listening to my heart. They said, "Man, when's your operation scheduled for?" Okay. Next week. Okay, good. That's good. Make sure that you make, and I had, let's see, my aunt had the same operation long time ago in Sacred Heart. She was the first one to have this type of operation in Sacred Heart. And I had 2 cousins that passed away. And you can't swear that it was from the same thing, but this is a hereditary thing.
Yeah.
And they died of, suddenly they died. One of them passed away the day before he was to go into the doctor to start the process to have the same operation. And his mother, I think it was his mother, my aunt, found him dead in the bed. So that was a strange time.
Right.
Between knowing I was going to have an operation and having it was a certain period of time. That was a strange. Technically, I could have fell out.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been a mystery why I was gone. You know what I mean? So I never really thought about that too much, but whenever I did, it was kind of weird.
Yeah.
It was a strange thought.
So kind of on the lighter side, at that same time, so you and I, we sort of tag team the gun club small group here, which is, half of it we talk about gun stuff, half of it we do Bible studies.
Yep.
And during this time, you had arranged with me, like, for the next, I think it was like 6 months.
Yeah.
I'm going to need you to just fully lead this thing.
Yep.
And so, but that first night, you said, I still want to be involved and present as I can.
Sure.
So, I'm going to have the surgery, later that evening. When you guys start the Bible study, I'd really like to maybe FaceTime the group. I'm like, sure, whatever,
Sure.
I'm like,
sure. I gotcha.
it's going to have open heart surgery, then go right into that. So I had my part ready to go.
Yep.
Never heard from you.
Well,
I think it was like maybe 3 or 4 weeks later when we first heard from you again. I'm like, Facebook's still up if you need to do the. That's
so funny, and I know that you are exactly right. I did say that, and I had all intentions of doing it.
You were just unconscious. That's not your fault.
I didn't wake up in the next morning. it wasn't like I even slept. It was the strangest, hardest 24 hours that I've ever been through, and I really would not want anybody to have to go through that.
Yeah.
It was so painful. I wanted to sleep, but I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the only time I was out of complete pain was when I was sleeping.
Right.
And it was, I don't know I don't know why God did this, but he positioned me in the bed to where every time I opened my eyes, I could see a clock. And I close them and I'd open them again. And I didn't have the energy to really even move my head. Because you could have as much pain medications as you want. And my nurse and I developed a system to where I would just move my hand like this, and she'd whisper to me, "Do you want some more pain?" "Yes, ma'am, I do." So she would give me more pain medication. So I don't know how many times I did that. I don't have any idea.
All day.
Tapping it. Yep. So I know I had a lot to do with it, but I didn't have energy to just move my arm or do anything. So I couldn't really move my head. So every time I opened my eyes, I saw the clock. That place was so hot, and I was so uncomfortable, and it was so loud because the two of the patients that were in the ICU with me were having a bad reaction.
Yeah.
And they were trying to get up out of bed, and they were having to be restrained and all this stuff, and I could hear it happening. I just wanted to sleep, and I couldn't. Every 15 minutes, I'd wake up. Okay, I got 15 minutes sleep. Okay, try to go to sleep. 15 minutes later, 15 minutes, all night. So I got zero sleep.
Mm-hmm.
What was funny is that I was so conscious that, and this is the time that you should be sleeping, right?
Yeah.
And recovering. I was so conscious that I could hear. They had this antiquated, daggone system of getting paperwork from one place to another. You go to a bank sometime and you put your stuff in a tube. You put your things in a tube, and it goes. That was the kind of stinking system they had to get the paperwork from one place to the ICU. Come to find out, this is a retrofitted ICU. They're working on a brand new one. So it was to the point where I was so aware of what was going on that I would listen to where one started, the turns it would take,
right,
until it got to the end. And I was able to distinguish, I think they have two of them, and I listened for, okay, there was one, it's making turns, boom. And I did that over and over and over again. I could hear all that stuff when you should be sleeping.
Right.
It was so loud, and I was burning up. I asked them to put ice on me. And Donna was in there before she left. I said, "Donna, I'm hot." And she said, "Are you hot?" "Yes." "Do you want ice on you?" "Yes." So they literally put ice on me. Well, that ice melted. Now I'm laying in a wet, warm bed. Like, man, come on. Everything just piled. I was so miserable.
Yeah.
In total pain. Just all body pain. It was hard. And the funny thing is, man, it was so funny that you can't leave the ICU until you're sitting up in a wheelchair. You have to be sitting up in a wheelchair.
Right.
And the doctor comes in and releases you if you're sitting up in a wheelchair, and everything else was right. And literally, they picked me up. They put me in the wheelchair, and I slumped over, and they picked me up again. They propped me up, and I was sitting with my head.
It's like Weekend at Bernie's.
Yes, exactly. And I still didn't have the energy to do anything. Still in pain. I was like, my head propped one to the right one time, and I opened my eyes. I just saw a line of people in the same position I was. Everybody was propped up, and they're leaning over. Some of them are leaning back. Some of them leaning forward. Technically, we're all sitting up. So,
yeah.
So every patient had one nurse, and that's how the nurses positioned the wheelchair.
Yeah.
See, doctor, he's sitting up. I did my job.
All right, look now.
Yeah. So funny.
That is a weird job to have.
Oh my gosh. Well, anyway.
Speaking of which, the question we have today is, what's the weirdest job you ever had? And thinking about this, all the jobs that I've had have been with the exception of my first two jobs when I was in college. I worked for a little bit at a lumber yard. I worked a little bit as a proofreader at a newspaper, which, by the way, that was the summer I was the most informed about world events because I read every page of every newspaper every day.
Wow. Wow.
But in fact, so if we're talking about like jobs just in general, that probably would have been the weirdest one because I remember one of my duties that was there, the paper I worked at, had been around for since the 1800s, mm-hmm. and they had this recurring column that nobody really wanted to maintain. So I'm like, I'll do it.
It's Texas.
Yeah, this is Texas, Brentwood, Texas, and the name of the paper was the Banner Press, and they had this recurring column where you would go back into the archives of the newspaper, and whatever date it was, you would go back 25 years, 50 years, and 100 years, and write a little article about what was happening in the community 25, 50, and 100 years ago. Okay. And so I remember, and it was once a week. So you kind of had a range of dates. What was happening that week, 25, 50, 100 years ago. And so I remember it was really fun.
It's right up your alley, actually.
Yeah, really up my alley because I love history stuff. And I mean, oddly enough, that was before I developed a love of history, but I think that was probably instrumental in that, because it was really, really interesting seeing all that stuff. It was really boring going through all the, this isn't like you click on things on the computer. This was you take a roll of microfilm.
You're doing microfilm.
Yeah, load it into a machine, and you hit fast forward and rewind, and it's this really old magnifying system that shows scanned images on this microfilm of all these old newspapers. So you couldn't like search by keyword or whatever. It was just like I'm rewinding to 100 years ago and just gonna start a random place and see what looks interesting. But there were things like it was that area. The town I lived in was a really little country town, 400 people, old like cowboy town. The bank still had granite countertops and brass bars. There was still a main street, one stoplight. There's a old guy with a dog sitting on the front porch of the main store, that kind of stuff.
Could be whittling any time of day.
Exactly, yeah. And that was the little town I lived in. And Brenham, that's where they make Bluebell ice cream, by the way.
Nice.
Which I've toured many times. But anyway, they had, it was a little bit larger city. But I would find interesting stuff like there was a shootout at high noon in front of the in front of the bank, and it was between this guy, and they had an argument about such and such, and so they one of them challenged the other to a duel, and this is the guy that lost and died, and
that was a legitimate way of solving problems.
It was they back to back, walk 10 paces, turn and shoot, that kind of thing.
How about that?
And stuff like that was just really interesting, and so that was probably the weirdest job. Everything else has just been related to engineering and building design. But now I've had a lot of weird projects.
Right.
Yeah.
What's first of all, how old were you when you were doing that job for the newspaper?
That's when I was the summer of my junior year in college, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Weirdest project.
Yeah. Well, this one wasn't actually a project. It was a proposed project. I met with this guy who was really interested in like teaching stuff about Genesis, and he had this a local ministry about it, and we had lunch one day, and this was right around the time that what's his name, Australian guy with the big ark up in Ken Ham, Creation Ark Ministries or something like that. It was right around the time that they were in the planning stages to build that big arc thing up there.
Okay.
And he's like, I want to do something similar to that. I want to build it on an Indian reservation, next state over, and I want it to be about that scale. But I want, and we were sitting at IHOP, and he pulled out this little plastic dinosaur, a little brontosaurus, and he said, I want to build a building that looks like this, and I want you to design it. And he just starts telling me, I want this feature on it. I want it to be, I want people to be able to like climb up the neck, and there'll be a zip line coming out of the mouth, and there'll be on the back of it, it'll be a big deck that looks like a saddle on this brontosaur that people can use as like parties and birthdays and stuff like that. But then inside this thing, it's going to be multi-levels, and inside the brontosaur is going to be a museum where you have exhibits and all this stuff. And then, the entrance will be like through the tail, and he's like explaining all this stuff, and I'm like doing some rough just like math in my head about the proportions of this thing, and like everything he's talking about is just not realistic using this type of dinosaur, and and he's like, I want you to be the one to design it, do the engineering. And in my head, I was like, I don't want to be the guy doing this, because there's so many problems with this concept. Making like there's this like mathematical relationship with just organisms in general, that once you get to a certain size, structurally it doesn't work. Okay. And it doesn't work for other reasons too, like the amount of energy that you can consume from your food doesn't match with the amount energy dissipates from the surface area of your body.
Right.
I think it's called the.
Just doesn't make math sense. No.
Yeah, there's this trade-off between the energy and structure and all this stuff that just doesn't work in normal biological systems, and there's an equivalent to that in a lot of building systems. And that was one of the things. And then just the function of it overall, like, we have building codes that conflict with a lot of things that you're wanting to do. It never became a project, obviously. Okay. Not for me, not for anyone else. But that was probably the weirdest proposal I had ever been involved in.
Did this guy build something in Pensacola, actually?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
A long time ago, yeah.
Okay, I got you. On a much smaller scale, but it was okay. I got you.
But
yeah, he was a dreamer, man. I applaud him for
and I've had a couple of those, and they're just the weirdest.
Right. Yeah. Well, it takes somebody takes both kinds of dreamers and and more realistic people to say it can happen or not.
Yep.
My weirdest job was inventorying boxes of yarn that have been in warehouses for years and years. In Lumberton, North Carolina.
You're describing my storage units full of my wife's yarn.
Well, these were old tobacco warehouses in Lumberton, North Carolina. I did it with my buddy Johnny Good.
Johnny B. Good?
Johnny C. Good, actually.
Oh, okay.
Johnny Clinton Good.
Is the sequel.
Yeah. He was my college roommate, good high school buddy, in college buddy. Anyway, so this company brought us to these warehouses and say, okay, you take these tags, go through these boxes, put on the tag what's in the box. All right, then, we'll do it. And, obviously it's summer, big warehouses. So they weren't clean either.
Right.
We had to dig into these things, and there were boxes put on boxes on boxes, so they crumbled. So we had to dig all through them, and rats and everything else. But that was the weirdest. Thing. We got paid to do it, which was fine. We took a lot of breaks.
Yeah,
we were pretty much left upon ourselves to do it. He'd drive up every. I think his name was Jerry. He would drive up every now and then. How y'all doing? Getting it done, Jerry. All right, Ian, let me know. Let's sit back down. Then the next year we became college roommates, and the rest was history. But that was the weirdest job I've had for sure.
Well, it kind of leads into what we're talking about today: weird jobs.
Weird jobs.
Because one of the things we do at Marcus Point, we did it last year. We're doing it this year around the same time. Is church wide, we're doing this Bible study.
Yeah.
And next week, our church is scheduled to start this. It's where we have over 100 different small groups and a couple thousand people in the church and everything across a bunch of different campuses, and we sort of take this time to set aside. And as a church, we all do the same Bible study in all these different groups.
I like that, by the way. Something about the unity of that is attractive to me.
And I'll be honest with you, when it was first when that idea was first proposed, I kind of was against it, just because I've never been comfortable using other people's stuff when I do lesson plans and things like that, and also it was seen as something like it's kind of inserting itself into the plans I already had, you know. And but once I got over that and realized there's really a huge potential here to incorporate this into the broader scope of what we do in our small group, I started thinking, well, this is kind of a cool idea, because we can do like a prequel series, and that's what we did last year, and that's what we just did this year. Is in the weeks leading up to that start date, I do a prequel series that gives a lot of the background and context information for what we're going to be talking about in that series, and that's been really fun. That's
fun to hear too.
And we just ended our prequel series in our small group last night. And so the name of the study that our church is going to be doing starting next week is called Return to Praise. And so the premise was, why is it return? Because that implies that at some point something left, right? And when we're talking about worship and praise, and we'll get into this in the actual Bible study, we're dealing with the presence of God, being in God's presence and what that entails, and how that affects us on a deep spiritual, emotional level, in our relationship with God. But we often take advantage of the fact that we have this kind of access to God, because for a long time mankind didn't. And that was sort of the prequel series that we did, was looking at that history. And it started in the Garden of Eden, because the Garden of Eden was this model of it was like the culmination of God's or the high point of God's creation, because in his creation of the universe, as you zoom in, you have the creation of the earth, you have the creation of Eden. Within Eden, you have the garden that's on top of this hill, and in that garden is where God placed mankind, and which mankind was created in the image of God, and our job was to tend the garden, to take care of of God's creation, and we did so in an environment where we could communicate with him freely. There was this relationship there between man and God, between God and his creation, that didn't exist afterwards, primarily because mankind failed. We sinned, right? There was that one rule in the garden.
We had one job.
Yeah, we had one job, right? And it wasn't even a weird job.
It wasn't even a weird job. You could eat.
Yeah, tend the garden, eat what you want, just don't eat from this one tree. And if you're creating people with a will to do what they choose, and you desire to have a relationship with them, to qualify that relationship, they need to have the opportunity to do something against you or wrong, right? Otherwise, like, I have a relationship with these people, but they really don't have any other choice.
Right. Choice. So, that's what we had to have a choice in order for it to be a choice, for us to choose.
Right. In order for that relationship to go both directions, we had, God obviously chose us, but we had to have the opportunity to choose him. So there was an opportunity to not choose him, and that's what that one rule was. And
that hasn't changed today. That's the same as today.
Correct. And so mankind failed that test, and we see man getting kicked out of the garden. That relationship, those lines of communication between man and God ended up being severed, and that begun the path that God took throughout the rest of Scripture to mend that to mend that damage, to repair that damage. And so in the meantime, so mankind lost its ability to be in the presence of that which was perfect, because we were no longer perfect. And if you're not perfect, you can't be in the presence of that which is perfect without somehow corrupting that perfect environment, right? So we had to somehow bridge that gap, and the culmination of that plan was coming. That's eventually who the Messiah was, Jesus, when he became that perfect sacrifice. So that was, about 4,000 years down the road. In the meantime, there had to be a system whereby mankind could address this sin, and it came in the form of simulating perfection. We built a model of creation. We built a model of God's abode in the form of a tabernacle, where it copied that pattern. As you get closer and closer to the inner space of the tabernacle, you got to holier and holier places, till eventually you get to the innermost part that was closed off from the rest of the world, where the presence of God dwelled, and mankind was not allowed into that room, with the exception of once a year, purely to address the fact that we can't go in there. A high priest, a very specific person, was allowed to go into that room after taking several steps to ritually cleanse himself, to prepare him to simulate perfection as he goes into that room and address the sin of humanity. And that whole system was set up to with the symbolism and the meaning to point forward to what Christ would one day do, right? Because it all revolved around sacrifices and the concept of holiness and perfection and all that kind of stuff. So there was the tabernacle itself. It was around for several hundred years. After Israel left Egypt, God gave them the specifications of the tabernacle at the base of Mount Sinai. They built it, and then something just rang. And then at the same time,
sorry.
I almost derailed my train of thought. So at the same time, as they're developing this, building this temporary structure that was housing for the presence of God, they were, wandering through the wilderness for 40 years, eventually comes into the promised land. We read the book of Joshua, where they're conquering the area of Canaan, coming into ownership of it, going through the times of the judges, where they're going through this cycle of idolatry and bondage and crying out to God and deliverance, all this stuff. Throughout that whole time, the tabernacle eventually stopped traveling places, and it ended up in a town called Shiloh that was in the Promised Land. By the way, it's a site that's currently being excavated by archaeologists, and they're discovering some really cool stuff that still exists there from that era. But anyway, so it ended up staying in Shiloh, and Shiloh ended up becoming the centerpiece of worship until Solomon built the temple. So we kind of have three different entities whose construction was guided by the Word of God. We have the universe itself, which God spoke into existence. He dictated its properties. We have the tabernacle, who God dictated its properties at Mount Sinai to Moses. We have the temple itself that King David acquired the building components for, and then his son Solomon ended up actually building it. That temple, Solomon's temple, the details of that were dictated by God. And there's this really cool narrative in Scripture when the temple was finished being built. They had this huge ceremony, and the presence of the Lord leaves the tabernacle in Shiloh and inhabits the most holy place of this new temple, which was a larger, more complicated version, or not really more complicated, but there were more elements to it. It was a larger version of that tabernacle, and obviously it was a solid building that wasn't required to move. And that temple stayed there for several centuries. And throughout the reign of the kings, Solomon finished the construction of the temple. After King Solomon, the nation split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And then the northern kingdom ended up falling to idolatry, getting conquered by the Assyrian Empire. The southern kingdom lasted longer, the southern kingdom of Judah. That's the line of kings that went through David and Solomon. But they eventually succumbed to idolatry as well. And we get to their ultimate downfall by the Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar. And we start to read in the book of Ezekiel this narrative where Ezekiel's standing by the river. He's one of these people that were taken, he was a Levite. He was taken out of the kingdom of Judah when Babylon came and conquered it. Because Babylon came and took a bunch of people out. Daniel and his friends were some of those, right? There was like 3 different sieges. Daniel's his friends were taken out during the first siege of Jerusalem. Ezekiel and his friends were taken out, I believe, at the second one. So all these people are sort of concurrent with each other. There's Daniel and his friends that are in Babylon serving under Nebuchadnezzar, and we remember that account. There's Jeremiah, the prophet, who's back in Jerusalem, telling everybody, the reason this is happening, the reason Babylon keeps attacking us is because Israel is being judged for, a whole list of things that Israel's been doing, idolatry, not keeping the land laws that God put for their inheritance, all that kind of stuff. Jeremiah was back in Jerusalem saying that. Ezekiel was over by the river Chebar, which is, I think, an offshoot of the Euphrates River, telling the other Israelites that had been brought out of the kingdom of Judah, reminding them, like, why is this all happening? And Ezekiel opens up with him standing at the river and seeing God's presence and all of the procession around that presence leaving Jerusalem and heading west. And the reason that happened was because God's presence, which had been in the temple this whole time, had to leave, because as Israel got further, or the kingdom of Judah got further and further into idolatry, all of the priests that were taking care of the temple started bringing their little idols from home and keeping it in their lockers in the temple. And as they started getting more and more comfortable with that idea, actually erected idols of Babylonian gods in the temple itself and started worshiping these Babylonian gods, these big idols, in the temple that God had dictated, the details of which God had dictated, and served as a resting place for God's presence as he dwelt with his people. And so God's presence can't be in that environment that's been transformed into a center point for idolatry. So his presence left. And that's how the temple was for the rest of its life. Now that temple got destroyed a couple years later by Nebuchadnezzar in his third siege of Jerusalem. But the temple that comes after that is often called Herod's temple. It's the second temple. The details of it weren't dictated by Scripture. It was an attempt to rebuild the temple that had been destroyed. Ezra, Nehemiah, those were instrumental people in getting that whole process started, rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem, rebuilding the temple itself. And it wasn't until after the Babylonian kingdom, Persian kingdom, Greek empire, Roman empire, it wasn't until the Roman Empire that second temple ended up getting finished. That's why a lot of people call it Herod's temple, because it's the one that Herod facilitated the final construction of it. That temple was not dictated by God. God's
Right.
presence was never in that temple.
Right.
Well, not in the same way that it was in the other temples. But that's what's kind of interesting, which led to my retraction at the beginning of today's episode, because God's presence left at the beginning of Ezekiel, and there was 6 centuries where God's presence wasn't among his people, wasn't in the temple. And you know, that mechanism that the temple served of pointing to the future, when our relationship with God, our ability to be in his presence would finally be resolved, that mechanism had been so far damaged that God's presence was no longer there. And it wasn't until the New Testament when baby Jesus, you know, one of the things in the Old Testament law was, you know, the firstborn son gets taken to the temple, presented to the priests, and there were sacrifices that happened to sort of commemorate the fact that God has given you a child, and there was an importance and a status that was assigned to the firstborn son that occurred in the temple. And so Jesus was brought to the temple in the New Testament for that, and that's where we see Simeon, who I forgot his name last time, but that's where Simeon said, I have seen his salvation. Yeah, because Simeon was told, like, you won't die until you see this, and so that's where we see him at the end of his life, seeing Jesus. That was the first time God had dwelled in his temple since way back 6 centuries earlier in Babylon. So that's a significant event if you're tracking this whole temple presence of God thing, because Jesus actually comes to the temple a couple times during his ministry. Well, that was Herod's temple. That temple ends up getting destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans, and but by that time you have Jesus' death, burial, his resurrection. You have the beginnings of the church, and the church is interesting because now we have now we're post-resurrection, right? That veil in the temple that separated us from the most holy place, that had been ripped in two, signifying that now there's no barrier between us and our ability to have a relationship with God. So we now can, like the New Testament says, we can walk boldly into the throne of grace because of what Christ did. It's not because of any goodness inherent to us, but Jesus paid any of the punishment that we deserved for our sins. So that sin has been paid for. Now, because of Jesus' righteousness, we have that ability to be in the presence of that which is perfect, because Christ did that for us. And so now we have the birth of the church and the growth of the church, and as the church grows, the Roman Empire realizes, or not necessarily realizes, but is suspicious of this growing group of people and persecutes the church because it's counter to the belief that Caesar is a deity, and they're afraid that these new Christians, their loyalty is going to be divided, and they persecute the church. And there's other reasons as well, but effectively what it does, it doesn't hurt the church. That's one of the weird things about the church. We're never really hurt from the outside. Persecution ends up spreading the gospel, spreading the church out. Roman persecution is what eventually led to Christianity being spread to the West, to Europe, eventually to the Americas, spreading to the East, to the India and China and all those areas. That happened as a direct result of persecution. The church is only hurt when we destroy ourselves from the inside. Infighting and that kind of stuff. So that's always interesting to me, how we're still giving into these little idols in our lives and pride and stuff, and we're still when we fight amongst each other, that's what hurts the church. We do it to ourselves, just like Israel did to themselves. Mankind seems to be constant in that respect. However, we see the growth of the church, and now we have this environment that we have access to called worship, and praise. And that's what leads into our current Bible study that we're going to be starting next week, a return to praise. There's been this long path where of returning. Some people might think of this as return to praise in the sense of a personal revival, like I've been stagnant and I'm returning to praise. Mm-hmm. That's part of it. But in the broader scope, there has been a huge path of that God has wrought throughout human history of restoring that original or repairing that damage that we did to that relationship, to our ability to be in God's presence. And when you look at this from the temple's perspective, we've been mentioning a lot about Ezekiel. In the last chapters of Ezekiel, we're given details of another temple. It's a temple that doesn't exist yet. It's a temple that's going to exist at some point in the future when Jesus returns to earth and is ruling in that final climax of Revelation and all those eschatological things of prophecy, that final culmination. There's going to be another temple, and the details of that temple are dictated in Scripture. They're dictated by God. So we have Eden dictated, the original creation dictated by God. Tabernacle dictated by God. Solomon's temple dictated by God. Herod's temple, nope. Not so much. It's just a weak imitation of what used to exist. God never dwelled in that like he did originally. The Ark of the Covenant was never in that one. The mercy seat, all that stuff. And then you have the temple in that millennial kingdom that's dictated by God.
Right.
And the differences between those Solomon's temple and that millennial temple are really interesting because it's obvious that one is inspired by the other, but the most interesting details to me are the aspects that are missing.
Something's missing. Some things are missing that are very important.
Right, because there's like no Ark of the Covenant. There's no mercy seat. There's no, I think it's table of showbread, altar of incense, stuff like that. Because those things, like the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, that's where the presence of God dwelled.
Yes.
Inside this little enclosed area that was shut off from mankind. That's long since been addressed. God dwells with his people at this time. Right. So there is no barrier there. There is no little spot where he has to be contained and be sectioned off from the rest of the imperfect world.
Right.
So that's not there. Other aspects of the tabernacle that point to characteristics of Christ that would have been represented in that temple in the absence of Christ are no longer in that final temple because Christ is there with us in person, doing all that stuff. So the part in history where we exist right now, where we're returning to praise, is that Herod's temple has been destroyed. We have the growth of the church, and that's where we're in that church era. We're looking forward to one day the second coming of Christ and him building that final temple, and we get to inhabit that space in history where we have that open relationship with God, and we don't have to be secluded on the outside of that presence.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, I think it's really cool.
Yeah, so that's the return. That's what we're talking about. The return to praise.
Yep.
I'm looking for. Have you seen the study?
Oh yeah. I've seen the study, watched all the videos, all that kind of stuff. Yep.
Okay. Are they out yet, or are they?
He's given us the like the electronic copy as an advanced copy to look at.
Great.
I sent us that a couple weeks ago.
Okay. Cool. Excellent.
Yep.
Josh, thanks, man. We're just under an hour here. Anything else you want to discuss before we?
Oh, tons, but we'll leave that for next time.
Okay, that sounds good. Actually, when we were leaving class last night, we talked to a mutual friend of ours that says that we invited him to come on the podcast. And, and I think that's going to be a really good episode. This guy, my goodness, what a testimony.
Right.
What a strong testimony by a very articulate. I call him he's charismatic, if you ask me. I really like this guy, man. He's a good guy who's come from a really hard background, and has God has changed him in such a way that is astounding.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't ever be surprised, but I don't want us ever to take that for granted. But I always want to be surprised at how he can change people, and he does it. You know? And our mutual friend is living proof of that today. So we don't know when he's going to come on. Probably in the next month or so. We're getting that done, but looking forward to that. All right, Josh.
All right,
Chris. Thanks. Appreciate it. All right, and we will see you all next week. All right.
see ya.